Hey guys, it's Jesse from Average Ontario Anglers. Today I'm going to show you my Great Lakes small tributary centerpin setup. So if you're new to centerpin fishing, it is so much fun. It's a very effective way to catch steelhead, especially in moving water. The combo that I'm using right now, this is an 11-foot light action centerpin rod. It's a moderate action, so basically it's a rod that has a lot of bend to it. It's going to protect your light lines. I have that paired up with a centerpin reel. I've got this loaded with a 12-pound main line. I like to use a slightly heavier main line because there's a lot of snags in here. If I'm using, say, a 6-pound leader and I snag up and I'm pulling on it to get the snag out, if something has to snap, the leader's going to snap. If you're using a light leader and a light main line, your main line could snap and you could lose your float, so that doesn't make sense. So I like to use a 12-pound just because there's a lot of snags here. If there's not a lot of snags, feel free to use whatever main line you want. Most people use anywhere from 10 to 15 pound. So again, 11-foot light action rod. A lot of guys use 13-foot rods. That's totally fine. It's really personal preference. In these smaller creeks with all these overhanging trees, I prefer a slightly shorter rod so that I am not hitting it against things, and when I'm walking through the bush, I'm not smashing into trees. As for leaders, you're gonna want to get a selection of leaders. I keep mine on my in my pouch here. This is I have a bunch of leaders, 4 different poundage of leaders. I have a 3, 4, 5, and 6. You're gonna want to use anywhere between 4 to 6 pound fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is very abrasion resistant. It's very, very clear underwater. It's nearly invisible. So when fish are really finicky, say like you've gone through the weekend and guys are just drifting in front of them with a heavier leader, and you go in there and you downsize your bait and you put on a really thin leader, you can oftentimes get those fish. Don't feel obligated to buy a really high-end combo right off the bat. You can catch fish on budget combos, rods and reels. If you can afford a better one, I'd recommend it because you won't have to replace it in the long run. So bait that I'm going to use, one of the most common baits that guys use is roe. I have one of these bait pals. This has 3 different kinds of roe. You don't have to have 3 different kinds. I just like to be prepared when I'm out for a day. This one actually has floaters in this section in case I go down to the river mouth. I have here trout eggs in different sizes, different colors. These are fairly big bags. And then in this one, I have very small natural trout eggs. So I like to have different sizes. I like to have small trout eggs, bigger bags that are trout eggs. I also have some salmon eggs bags in here, different sizes, different colors, just a little bit of everything. Sometimes the fish get fairly finicky and they won't touch, like, you know, small bags. If the water's murky, they'll want something bright, and vice versa. You don't want to be tossing big bags if the water's gin clear. Now, bags are not the only thing you need. This is my bead box. Make sure none of the beads fall out. That's not a ton of beads. Beads are pretty cheap though, so you can stock up with a nice case like this and fill it with beads for probably like 50 bucks. It sounds like a lot, but you'll have some of these beads for a long time. Beads come in different shapes, sizes, colors, and they're made of different materials. So really, if you're fishing in fast water, they have glass beads that sink really fast. If you're fishing in clear water, they have more translucent beads that look more natural. They have beads with dots on it, like a blood dot they call it. And they have glow beads, they have bright beads, they have UV beads for low light. There's lots of different beads. The most popular colors by far are peach, chartreuse, and one of my favorites is white. But that especially works very well post-spawn when the fish are eating what they call dead egg bite. You're also going to need some floats. So I keep a little box of different floats. Again, it's going to depend on what river you fish, on what size. You're going to want floats from small little floats like that. They have clear floats. These are a little bit bigger. And they have different shapes of floats. So a float like this is called an acorn float. These are really good in fast water because they don't sink very well. So you may notice on a float, this is a Riverwood float. These are my favorite floats. This one says on it Riverwood 4G. 4G means 4 grams. You'll notice the Raven floats too. This is a Raven. This says 2.8 G. That's actually something that a lot of people don't either understand or they don't really pay attention to, but that number tells you how much weight that float can handle and be effective. So like if you're using a 5-gram float and you only have 1 gram of weight pulling it down, when the fish grabs it, the float won't be sensitive to go down. You want to match the amount of weights that you have to a certain extent to match the grams that that float is rated for. So if you have a 5-gram float and you add 4 to 4.5 plus a row bag, that float's going to sit on the water, and then as soon as the fish grabs it, it's just going to go straight under. The fish isn't going to feel a lot of resistance from pulling down a float. It's just going to slide under. You're going to catch more fish, and that's one thing that I regret looking back in the day, is I never really I just put on split shots. I didn't really take into account the float and its capabilities. So that is one advantage you can have, is by making sure that your float is properly weighted. I think one tip though that I'd have to say that a lot of people do not understand when they start out float fishing, I'm just gonna get this rod out here, is that the current speed is different on the top of the water, I'm just gonna pull this down, than it is at the bottom of the water. So for instance, this is your float, this is your bait, okay? This is an exaggeration, but the top of the water is very fast. Okay, so say the water's flowing this way. So if you drop your bait out, this is gonna catch the fast water and go fast. And this slow water down here is gonna drag the bait this way. Now you always want your bait to go first, okay? You don't want your float to be dragging your bait. You want your bait to be in front of the float. So one thing you have to do, it's called trotting. So as your float is going downstream, slightly pull back on it. When you pull back on it, it allows the bait to swing first, and your float isn't going to be like this in the water. It's going to be slightly tilted back like that. The reason that you want to do that is it helps get the bait down further, and also all these split shots that are helping get your bait down, the fish always sees your bait first. The bait's going to be in the water first, then the split shot. So if the fish is going to grab the bait, which he probably will, he's not going to see all these split shots. If it goes the other way, all these split shots are going to go in front of his face. He's going to move out of the way, and then your bait's going to go by. So it's definitely not as effective. Keep that in mind. That's another thing that I wish I knew when I first started out, is to make sure, it's called trotting your float. Make sure you're trotting your float in faster water. Obviously, if you're fishing slow pools, you can't really trot your float, but your bait is hanging more vertical, so the split shots are going to be above the fish anyway. So anyway, there's other baits you can use. There's pink worms, there's flies. There's a lot of different baits that people use to catch steelhead. So anyway, that's just a few tips, quick tips. Today was pretty nice. It's raining, as you can see. It snowed last night, which is, we thought we were done with snow, but everyone is, you know, staying home because of this coronavirus. So I thought I'd get out and do some fishing, social distancing, and I ended up catching 3 fish in about an hour actually, and the bite just died down. So I thought I'd do a quick little video. So anyway, if you have any questions about what you should use as a center pin setup, go on our Instagram account, send us a message and we'll help you, okay? Tight lines.